Okay, so continuing with Basics of Camera Part 1, um, some additional comments on speed. So why do we want a slower shutter speed? I have a mistake here, but again, we want to capture ambient light. We want to, and that's necessary, create a deliberate blurring. Um, we want a faster um, speed if we want to do fast action. Okay, so continuing on, the flash and manual mode. Again, manual mode allows us to change both the speed and the aperture, and this is important in our wedding or special event photography in low light situations so we get a more natural picture. Okay, ISO. Another very important topic is ISO. Back in the old film days, you'd buy a film, it would have an ISO number, and typically you bought 200, which was a general number, or you bought a 400, 800 if it was a cloudy day or you were doing sports shots. One of the things to be aware of is ISO gives us a measure of the sensitivity and the resolution of the paper. If you think of a balance, one side there's resolution, one side there's sensitivity. And as you gain sensitivity, you lose resolution, and vice versa. So if I go to an ISO 100, I get a very, very high resolution paper, but it has lower sensitivity, which is fine in a studio setup where I have very much a controlled lighting, a lot of lighting, but is not very good in a low light situation. When I talk about resolution, it is the ability to separate pixel to pixel. So if I take a picture in a studio and it's got a high resolution, it enables me to really blow up that picture and make it a very, very large print, and it still looks clean, sharp, and vibrant, and all the pixels are clearly separated. If I take a picture in low light or a sports shot and I have that ISO up, say, at 12,800, you're going to start to see a lot more noise and less distinguishability between the pixels. And so a lot of time those pictures I have to crop or make smaller to improve the resolution. So again, there's always a payoff, higher sensitivity, higher resolution. And so it becomes a game that we have to play. So typically when I'm shooting in the studio or outside or in good lighting conditions, I'll do an ISO of 200. A lot of cameras, you have to go in additional settings to go below 200, and I find 200 personally is a good number. I will increase that number as the day goes on and the light becomes less, or as I go into low light situations, I'm begin to increase that ISO number, but begin to be aware of the consequences of that. Thankfully, a lot of the DSLRs have really come a long way and allow you to go down very low in light and really up that ISO number with minimal issues with noise and drop off resolution. So you always want to use the lowest ISO numbers possible, but again, as light becomes less and you need faster action, if you're doing a sports a sports shoot in low light, you can't use flash, you need a high ISO. Otherwise, you're actually going to see noise, you're going to see issues, you're going to see blurring. So it's important to get the ISO number correctly. Next thing I want to talk about is depth of field. What is depth of field? When I refer to a sharp picture, what do I mean by that, and how do we control it? Well, theoretically, with every lens, there is a particular point that is in focus. So if I'm taking a picture, I'm looking, there is a particular point that you could define as perfectly in focus. And let's say, ideally, we're focusing on a person. That perfect focus is going to be on the eyes. The focus should always be on the key subject. If it's a person, it should be the eye or the subject of the photograph. And the goal is that we want to draw people's attention to that center of focus. Now, there then should be a zone of acceptable focus. So as we go away from the eye, we're looking at the eyelid, etc., it should still be in focus. The face, for example, may still be in suitable focus. But there then comes a point where it begins to blur off. So the zone that's in acceptable focus is referred to as the depth of focus. And that can be either large or small. And we want to control that. So maybe we want a picture of someone's face and we just want a very small section around the eye in focus and then everything else in blurred. Or maybe we're taking a picture of a person, we want them completely in focus and just the background blurred. So the depth of focus is the range that is in suitable focus. Okay? It is controlled by several factors, and we can do it first of all by changing the apertures we talked about, the f-stop. A lower f-stop is going to mean a smaller depth of focus. A larger f-stop means a larger depth of focus. What else it controls? Well, the focal length of a lens. When I buy a lens or you look at a lens, on the side you will see, for example, a 50 millimeter lens, or 17 to excuse me, 17 to 24, or 70 to 200. That is the focal length. Okay. The larger the focal length, the smaller the depth of field. So if I'm using a zoom lens, say at 400 millimeters, I have a very small depth of field. If I'm using what is referred to as a wide angle lens, something less than say 24 millimeters, then I'm going to have a very wide depth of focus. So even though, for example, I'm using say an f of 2.8, with a 17 millimeter lens, I've got a lot more in focus than a 400 millimeter lens with the same f2.8. Hopefully that makes sense. Another thing is the distance of the subject from the camera. The closer the subject to the camera, the less is in focus, or the smaller the depth of field. The further away the person is, or the subject, the greater the depth of focus. I do a lot of micro photography, which is close-up photography, very close up, and you will find that a very, very small amount of that picture is in focus. Finally, there's referred to zone focusing and hyperfocal distance. Something I'm talking about more about later, and particularly in the old lenses, they would have a zone marked on it, and that made more sense in those days. The focal length of a camera and its position regards the subject impacts the perspective. You know, the closer so if I have a lens, say a 17 millimeter lens, a wide angle, and I'm taking a person and their hand is close to the camera or the lens, their hand is going to look bigger in proportion to their body because it's got a small focal length. If that makes sense to you. Okay? So the focal length of a camera does have an impact on perspective. And you have what is referred to as a wide angle distortion, and you also have something called as a telephoto effect, where it kind of compresses everything in. And this is something we'll talk more about later, but it does allow you some creative ability as well. Focusing back in the old days, you know, you'd have that little circle and it would be blurred out, and when you got in focus it became clear. Well, today cameras have very advanced algorithms that allow them to focus very quickly. And as you look through a camera and you press the camera halfway, you'll see this series of red dots come out, and they're focusing points. And there are two types. There's a single shot and there's al servo focusing modes. We typically use single shot. Al servo is regarding movement. So when you want to focus on something that is moving. I'm not talking about somebody walking, I'm talking about somebody that is moving very fast, running, sports, etc. So we typically use single shot mode. Okay. Now, as I said, when you press the camera halfway, so you press the button to shoot a picture halfway, you will look in the camera, you see these little red dots, they're the focusing point. And you will have a dial that enables you to move and select which focusing point you want. And you want the focus to be on the subject matter. If it's a person, you want it to be on the face, and ideally on the eyes, or on whatever the subject is, or the center of the focus of that picture. As you press it halfway, you can move and select that red dot. As I said, pressing it halfway, it will focus on that red dot and it locks it in. Then once you press it full, it takes the picture. So it's important to press halfway, get it focused, and then press full way so that it takes a picture. If you're getting a lot of blurred pictures, you're not focusing. So you want to press it halfway real quick and then full way so the camera focuses and then takes the picture. In sports, as I said, we take al servo. And we have sports cameras which have very advanced algorithms and have the ability for you to really train the camera to understand motion and what to focus in and moving. Sports is a very expensive thing to do, and as I said, we'll talk more about sports later. Composition, again, this is something we're going to talk and spend a whole lot of time on, and but in basic, you know, there are rules, and it's important that, you know, the subject take up most of the picture or be we follow certain rules. You know, a lot of time bad pictures are we have the person too much headroom, as we'll discover, or too little headroom, they're cut off, they're badly placed. So there are rules, and we will talk more about those in a future lesson. Okay, well, this concludes part 1 of this. I look forward to going into more detail in part 2, where we'll look at some more key subjects and points in photography. Thank you.